Back in the 1970s, when I came on the scene at Cummins, there was a small internal newspaper that they'd hand out quarterly called Cummins Clippings. And it had notes about the company and about things in engineering and training. And one issue had a picture of Clessie Cummins, the founder, and he was standing by a dragline machine that had one of his inline engines in it, and it had external rocker arms with grease cups, obviously a very low-speed diesel. And oh, how far we've come since then. In my experience, the engines that I saw when I started at Cummins, the popular engines that were coming in at the end of their life really were the J's and the C's. The C was in cement trucks and box trucks. It was about 160 to 180 horse. And the J was its brother. The J's were more of an industrial engine. They ran a lot of saws at sawmills, and the guys that had those loved them. Then we had the heavy-duty engine at the time was a 743 cubic inch, which eventually became the 855, which eventually became the N14, which eventually became the Apex, which was eventually renamed into the Signature, which was the 600 horse version at 2050 torque. And then we had the ISX. And today we call it the X15. So they also had the V8s. They had V6s, V8s, and then they had a 903, which is a big V8. The smaller V8s were 555 cubic inches and down, and then the big one was 903 cubic inches. And the 903 was a pretty popular engine. There was a trucking company in my area. I think they were based out of Chicago called Consolidated Freight. They were a massive company in the 70s. And they ran all 903s and they had air starters on them. And then 903s were also in a lot of Coast Guard shore patrol boats. And we actually rebuilt a number of those for the Coast Guard. And then we had 903s that were in the military, and they had ceramic linings in them, and they were about 1,000 horse, and I think they still make that engine today. And they're personnel or tank emergency retriever engines. They're made to run with no cooling system. If I remember right, they're supposed to run for 3 minutes at 1,000 horse before the engine fails. And they're a Hail Mary engine. When the main that unit's turbine is failed, that engine will pull it back out of the battle line, and that's what it was designed for. So then Cummins had the high horsepower engines. They were called the Ks. So you had the inline K, and they did put that in trucks for a while at 450, 525, and then 600 horse. And the engines were expensive to fix. They got very poor fuel mileage compared to most of the engines, but they had brute power. In fact, they had so much power that they were hard on drive trains and especially hard on tires for the guys that had them. And but they loved them. If you had to pull heavy, that was the engine. But it was hard on that truck. And the engines had a lot of leaks. They had a big aluminum girdle on the bottom of the block that the pan bolted to. And the gas between the girdle and the block was always leaking in the trucks. And that was because the frame rails in the trucks just couldn't take the power. And they'd move, and then that girdle would move because the mounts on the front were bolted to that girdle. So it would kind of twist that girdle. The girdle looked like a big aluminum box that bolted on the bottom of the block. So they stopped putting those in trucks, and they did very well in the machines where they were bolted onto iron rails that didn't move, and they had long life. And then they had the VKs, and the VKs are still around today. They call them KVs, and they're up to almost 5,000 horsepower last time I checked. and they make a V6 V16. I think they make a V24, but I know they make a V16 and then a V12 in the K series only. So those were the Cummins engines that I knew. And electronics came in around 1991. That's when the N14 mechanical engine had a PT pump, became the Select, N14 Select. And Select was the first generation of electronics, and then it went to Select Plus. And Plus was just a little bit of change in the hardware and software on the engine to make it a little more configurable. And then we went to the ISX, which is the Apex, and we're going to talk about the Apex next.